They say power reveals the truth about a person. But in the quiet town of Ashbridge, it wasn't power that changed everything. It was fire. I moved here for peace, for quiet, for a chance to breathe. I didn't expect a war over lawn heights, firewood piles, and neighborhood standards. But when my firewood disappeared and the community queenpin, Evelyn Cross, smiled like she owned the world, I knew. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. And what started with missing logs ended with a courtroom, handcuffs, and the collapse of a little suburban empire. Funny thing about fire. It doesn't just destroy. Sometimes, it clears the way for something better to grow. The air in Ashbridge Pines carried that sharp, honest chill that only Colorado winters could bring. Logan Hayes stood on his front porch, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee, watching his breath mix with the morning fog. His daughter Ellie was still sleeping inside, probably curled beneath the faded quilt her mother made years ago. He cherished mornings like this. Simple. Peaceful. After a lifetime as a state trooper, and the chaos that followed losing his wife, he'd earned this stillness. The house was an old craftsman, a little creaky in places, but solid. Like Logan. He'd bought it for the quiet, for the trees, for the fireplace his wife had always dreamed of. Last week, he'd spent an entire afternoon chopping and stacking firewood behind the house. A neat pile, split oak, bone dry, ready to burn. He even arranged the logs by size. It was the kind of small, meditative task that reminded him he was still capable of building something. Which is why, when he stepped around back that morning to grab a few logs, his blood ran cold. The pile was gone, not a stick, not a sliver, nothing. For a moment, he blinked, trying to convince himself he'd misremembered. Maybe he hadn't stacked as much as he thought. Maybe he'd moved it. But the clean rectangle of bare earth said otherwise. Someone had taken it. Logan's first instinct wasn't rage. It was confusion. Then, very quickly, suspicion. He went back inside, his mind already ticking through possibilities. Ashbridge Pines wasn't a high-crime area. No broken windows, no graffiti, no reports of car thefts. In fact, the only real trouble he'd encountered since moving in 2 months ago wore pastel blazers and wielded citations like they were holy scripture. The HOA. He set his mug down, pulled up the security cam app on his phone, and tapped into the backyard feed from last night. There she was, Evelyn Cross, president of the Ashbridge Pines Covenant Council. 60-something, sharp haircut, face always plastered in a smile that felt more like a threat than a greeting. She wasn't alone. 2 young men in reflective vests were hauling his firewood, into the back of a white HOA maintenance truck. Evelyn stood there like a foreman, arms crossed, nodding in approval. It wasn't even stealthy. Broad daylight, no hesitation. Logan watched, jaw tight, heart pounding slower and heavier than it did during any of the high-speed pursuits from his old job. It was one thing to enforce petty lawn violations. This was theft. And not just theft, entitlement. He paused the video, stared at Evelyn's frozen image. Something behind her smug posture screamed, "What are you going to do about it?" Logan didn't answer that question right away. He simply grabbed his coat and walked straight to her front door. Evelyn's home was a showcase of HOA-approved taste. Perfect mulch lines, boxwoods trimmed into miserable little cubes, and a driveway cleaner than a surgical table. A brass president plaque glinted beside the doorbell. Logan barely got his hand up before the door flew open. "Logan," she said with a tone soaked in honey and condescension. "What a surprise. I want to know why you took my firewood." She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, dear," she said, blinking innocently. "That unsightly stack behind your home? It was flagged for non-compliance, posing a fire hazard. Page 14, subsection 3 of the HOA guidelines." "I'm not a member of the HOA." Evelyn smiled wider. "Yes, well, your property borders association land. That makes your visible exterior subject to transitional regulation." "You're making that up," Logan said flatly. Her smile thinned. Look, I understand this is a lot for someone new to the neighborhood, but the HOA has standards. You wouldn't want Ellie to be seen as part of a non-compliant household, would you? The mention of his daughter sent a low burn through Logan's chest. You had no right, he said. You took something that didn't belong to you. It's just firewood, she said with a breezy shrug. You can always get more. He held her gaze. You've made a mistake. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. Just a flicker, like a snake measuring the distance before it strikes. Careful, Mr. Hayes. You don't want to develop a reputation around here. I already have one, he said, voice calm. And you're about to learn what that means. He turned and walked back down the pristine concrete path, the cold air biting at his cheeks. Inside his home, he pulled up the camera footage again, downloaded it, saved it to 3 flash drives, one for his lawyer, one for the sheriff's department, and one, well, just in case. This wasn't about firewood anymore. This was about power. And Logan Hayes had spent a lifetime dismantling people who abused it. The following morning, the neighborhood was buzzing, but not in the way Evelyn Cross had hoped. Someone had posted an anonymous message on the Ashbridge Pines community board. A simple message, no name. Just a still frame pulled from Logan's security footage, showing Evelyn mid-command, pointing at his firewood as her hired hands loaded it into the truck. Below the image, a caption. What else will they take if we stay quiet? It was all it took. Whispers spread like wildfire. The older residents, those who had lived in the neighborhood before Evelyn turned the HOA into her private kingdom, started murmuring again at mailboxes and over fences. A few even stopped by Logan's porch, curious, cautious, and angry in that quiet, simmering way. One of them was Dean Carter, a retired Air Force mechanic with a limp and a no-nonsense attitude. He stood on Logan's porch that afternoon, arms folded. She took your firewood, he asked bluntly. Logan nodded, and claimed it violated regulations I'm not even subject to. Dean exhaled slowly. Figures. She fined me $250 last year because my wind chimes violated audio harmony. I told her I lost most of my hearing in Kuwait. She didn't care. Logan stared at him. She'd do that to anyone else. Dean hesitated, then nodded toward the street. Janine, 2 doors down. Her son's therapy garden. They bulldozed it, said it obstructed view symmetry. And don't get me started on the Veterans Memorial a few of us tried to build. HOA shut it down cold. Said it wasn't in keeping with the community aesthetic. Logan's jaw clenched. So, this is a pattern. Dean leaned closer. I've lived in HOA neighborhoods my whole life, Logan. There's a difference between maintaining community standards and running a dictatorship. Evelyn doesn't follow the bylaws. She weaponizes them. Logan sat back, mind racing. She's not just overstepping. She's targeting. Dean smiled grimly. Welcome to the resistance, neighbor. That night, Logan pulled out his laptop and opened the Ashbridge Pines HOA bylaws, the same packet Evelyn had smugly delivered when he moved in. He read through every single page, highlighted clauses, scribbled notes, cross-checked them against county zoning ordinances. And the more he read, the more his stomach turned. Dozens of clauses Evelyn had quoted in public meetings weren't legally enforceable. Others had been amended improperly. Some weren't even real. She'd invented regulations, cited non-existent violations, and used fines and penalties to strong-arm anyone who pushed back. Logan's background in law enforcement made him methodical. He printed everything, created a timeline, logged video evidence, interviewed neighbors, recorded their stories. Within days, he'd built a case file, thicker than a phone book. And he wasn't even close to done. He didn't confront Evelyn. Not yet. Instead, he let the fire grow. He talked to the single mom down the block, whose car had been towed for parking slightly crooked. To the elderly man whose flagpole had been forcibly removed. To the teacher, fined $75 for having Halloween decorations up past October 31st. Each time, he listened, took notes, made copies. And with every injustice added to the file, Logan's conviction deepened. This wasn't just a feud over firewood. It was about reclaiming a community that had been hijacked by one woman's obsession with control. The final straw came when Ellie came home from school, quiet and withdrawn. Logan asked what was wrong. She hesitated, then finally said, "Some kids said we don't belong here, that we're non-compliant. One of them said their mom told them your firewood was dangerous." Logan's breath caught. "They laughed at our porch swing," Ellie said, barely a whisper. "Said it was ugly like our backyard." So, that night, Logan sat in the dark, watching the flames flicker in the fireplace, thinking about his wife, about how she used to say, "The quiet ones fight the longest." He reached for his phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in over a year. "Hayes?" a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah," Logan said. "You still with the Attorney General's office?" "Sure am. Why?" Logan stared into the fire, voice low and deliberate. "I think I've found a little HOA playing tyrant, and I've got enough evidence to start a bonfire of my own." By the end of the week, Evelyn Cross knew something was wrong. For the first time in years, her Thursday morning compliance walk was met not with wary smiles and shut blinds, but with cold stares and closed doors. People weren't waving anymore. They weren't pretending. They were done playing her game, and she felt it in her bones. It started subtly. The Wilsons, who used to practically worship the HOA, suddenly skipped the monthly meeting. Then the Bakers, longtime rule followers, painted their shutters bright turquoise, violating Regulation 6B without so much as an application. And then came the flyer, taped to nearly every mailbox in Ashbridge Pines overnight. It read, "Know your rights." The HOA cannot fine you without proof of violation and a proper hearing. But you are not required to allow HOA entry onto your property without consent. All residents have a right to appeal HOA rulings under County Statute 422. Evelyn's hands shook as she yanked the flyer off her own mailbox. The website? Professionally built, sleek, clean, anonymous, and full of damning documentation, footage, emails, side-by-side comparisons of real bylaws versus the fake ones Evelyn had invented, personal stories from neighbors she'd publicly shamed, fined, or ostracized. A full expose on the HOA's secret spending, complete with budget inconsistencies and hidden legal fees tied to firms she had close ties with. She didn't need to ask who was behind it. Logan Dawson had officially gone to war. But Evelyn wasn't going down without a fight. She doubled down. The very next day, she issued 5 new citations. 1 to Dean for excessive lawn ornamentation, 2 to the Bakers for non-regulation paint, and another to Logan himself for failure to maintain woodpile visual integrity, whatever that meant. And then she made a mistake. She tried to get into Logan's backyard. Not through the gate. No. She walked around, clipboard in hand, accompanied by her loyal lackey Bernard. The same guy who thought HOA power gave him a reason to walk around in tactical sunglasses. They unlatched the fence. What they didn't know was that Logan, anticipating retaliation, had upgraded his security system days ago. Not just motion sensors, audio recordings, with time-stamped footage, including Evelyn saying, on camera, "If we don't find a violation, make one. He needs to be reminded who's in charge." Later that night, Logan sent a copy of the clip directly to the County Oversight Committee. He didn't post it online, not yet. Let her wonder how much he had. Let her sweat. But Evelyn wasn't the only one sweating. Behind the scenes, HOA board members started asking questions. Barbara, the treasurer, called a private emergency session to review the association's finances. What she found made her sick. Thousands of dollars in discretionary expenses, vague line items labeled community beautification initiatives, and legal consulting. All signed off by Evelyn, no one else. The board was furious, not just because of the money, but because they knew their names were attached to it. Barbara, usually mild and painfully polite, showed up on Logan's porch that night with an apology and a folder full of printouts. "She's been using us," she admitted, her voice shaking. "We thought she had our backs, but she's covering her own." Logan took the folder. "You're doing the right thing. I'm not trying to destroy the HOA, just clean it out." Barbara nodded, eyes glassy. "We're tired. People are afraid to live here." He reached into his jacket and handed her a flash drive. "Take this to the county oversight board, tomorrow morning. Don't wait." She nodded again, then left quietly. The next morning, Evelyn woke up to something she hadn't experienced in years. Opposition. Half her board was gone. Bernard wouldn't answer his phone. Barbara had sent in her formal resignation, effective immediately. Residents started wearing T-shirts that read, "My lawn, my rules." Even the local news was sniffing around. Channel 7's headline that night: "Dictatorship in the suburbs. One man challenges the power-hungry HOA president." And the kicker? They aired the clip of Evelyn trespassing. Her face was pixelated, but her voice wasn't. Evelyn screamed into her TV, red in the face. Logan, watching from his living room, barely sipped his coffee. This wasn't over. But the cracks were showing. And Logan had only just begun. Evelyn Cross wasn't used to losing. And she certainly wasn't going to let a rogue homeowner with a badge and a blog take her down without a fight. The morning after Channel 7's expose, Evelyn convened a crisis meeting with the few remaining loyal members of the HOA board, namely Bernard, who still believed Evelyn could do no wrong, and Cynthia, who was too scared to disagree. They met in Evelyn's pristine dining room, surrounded by trophies from her former career as a community excellence advocate. The irony was thick. "Listen closely," she snapped, spreading out papers across the table. "We're initiating Emergency Protocol Alpha." Cynthia blinked. "That's not in the bylaws." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Exactly." She produced a draft memo, already printed and dated. Emergency Code Enforcement Directive. Due to recent threats to community order, the HOA is authorized to conduct unannounced inspections of all properties, issue immediate citations without hearings, and temporarily suspend due process clauses in the event of security threats. Bernard grinned like a kid handed a badge. Cynthia looked nauseated. "We'll call it a security initiative," Evelyn continued. "Say there's been vandalism, threats to board members. We use Logan's little campaign against us." "And if the residents don't comply?" Bernard asked. Evelyn smiled, cold and perfect. "Then we fine them into submission, or lien their homes. Their fear is our leverage." That weekend, the HOA blitz began. Citations flew like confetti. Unapproved flower pots, $100 fine. Porch lights, not HOA-approved wattage, $200. One woman got hit for having irregularly shaped mulch. Logan, unsurprisingly, got 5 citations in 2 days, his favorite being the one that cited emotional landscaping disorder. Whatever the hell that meant. But Evelyn hadn't counted on one thing. The neighborhood had changed. They weren't afraid anymore. The flood of ridiculous fines only added fuel to Logan's growing movement. His blog, Ashbridge Uncensored, exploded in views. Dozens of homeowners began publicly challenging the HOA's authority. Even more damning, a whistleblower emerged. Cynthia. She couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the pressure, the abuse. She walked into Logan's garage one night, trembling, holding a folder. Inside, the original HOA formation documents, the ones that explicitly excluded Logan's property from the HOA boundaries, a legal error Evelyn had known about for years and had buried. "She forged the maps," Cynthia whispered. "She redrew the zoning lines. Your house was never under her jurisdiction." Logan exhaled, steady and calm. "You just won this war." With those documents and the earlier surveillance footage, he now had a bulletproof legal case. And he wasn't just going to use it defensively. He was going on offense. The next morning, Evelyn received a certified letter that made her hand shake. DA's office. Subject: pending investigation into fraudulent HOA activity and abuse of power. She reread it 5 times. Her perfect world was unraveling faster than she could staple it together. But she still had one move left. If Logan wanted war, she'd bring the whole house down. The night of the emergency town hall was supposed to be Logan's defining moment. He had the documents, the whistleblower testimony, video evidence, and the support of nearly every neighbor who'd ever been fined for a flower pot. His garage-turned-campaign headquarters buzzed with quiet excitement. The plan was simple: unveil the truth, vote Evelyn out, and move to dissolve the HOA entirely. But just as people began to gather at the Ashbridge Community Center, something went horribly wrong. First, the power went out. Not just in Logan's house, but in every home on the western half of the neighborhood, the side closest to the community center. Then, Logan's backup generator, a recent investment, mysteriously failed. His phone? Dead. The batteries in his wireless mic? Gone. Everything he had prepped to share vanished into darkness. But that wasn't even the worst part. From across the street, a scream tore through the night. "Fire! Fire!" Logan bolted out the door. The community center, the very heart of Ashbridge, where birthdays had been celebrated and bake sales once filled the halls, was engulfed in flames. Thick black smoke poured into the sky, painting the stars with soot. People scrambled, some screaming, some frozen. Logan sprinted forward, just as the fire engines roared onto the scene. And standing off to the side, near a shadowed oak tree, Logan saw her, Evelyn Cross. She wasn't running. She wasn't screaming. She was watching, expression unreadable. In that moment, something inside Logan shifted. This wasn't just neighborhood politics anymore. This was criminal, dangerous, personal. Later, as the firemen battled the blaze, Logan found what was left of the locked filing cabinet inside the ruins of the community center. Charred, twisted, but not completely destroyed. Miraculously, tucked in a fire-resistant envelope, one document remained legible: the original HOA plat map, clearly showing Logan's property as outside jurisdiction. It was the final nail in Evelyn's political coffin. But the sabotage didn't end there. The next morning, Logan's front lawn was vandalized. Spray painted across the fence were the words, "Traitor, rat, go back to the city." Even then, Logan didn't back down. He called a public meeting at the local library, this time with official police presence. More than 60 residents attended, far more than any HOA meeting Evelyn had ever hosted. This time, Logan spoke not just with facts, but with fire in his voice. "You burned down our records to hide the truth," he said. "But the truth is standing in front of you. You lied. You fined people illegally. You bullied good families out of their homes. And now you've committed arson." There was dead silence. And then, slowly, clapping. It started with Mr. Davis, the oldest resident in the neighborhood. Then it spread, row by row, until the entire room stood, applauding. Evelyn didn't show up that night. She had vanished. But justice was already on her trail, because the fire marshal's report came back the next day. Accelerant used, gasoline, point of origin, inside the board's private document storage. Someone had burned the past to avoid facing the future. But Logan wasn't letting that happen. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet, crackling tension. It wasn't just a civil hearing anymore. It had become something more, something symbolic. What started as neighborhood drama had escalated into criminal charges, public scandal, and a trial that would determine not just Evelyn Cross's fate, but the future of the entire Ashbridge community. Logan sat near the front, dressed in a crisp blazer, a far cry from the flannel and boots he usually wore. Beside him sat his lawyer, sharp-eyed and calm. Behind him, a sea of neighbors, young families, retirees, Even those who had once sided with Evelyn but now looked hollow and ashamed. Evelyn entered last. Gone were her designer suits and confident gait. She looked deflated. Makeup masked the exhaustion, but her posture betrayed it all. Her eyes scanned the courtroom until they landed on Logan. He didn't flinch, just stared back, unmoved. The prosecutor wasted no time. They laid it all out, methodically, surgically. Evidence of forged notices, inflated fines, illegal surveillance. And then came the pièce de résistance, the fire marshal's report, paired with surveillance footage from a traffic cam across the street. It showed Evelyn's SUV parked at the community center just hours before the fire, her silhouette loading a gasoline can into the trunk. Evelyn's attorney scrambled, claiming it was circumstantial, that Evelyn was merely preparing for a seasonal yard cleanup. But the jury didn't buy it. No one did. And then, Logan took the stand. He spoke simply, not with venom, not with dramatics, but with clarity. "This was never about a bonfire," he said, voice steady. "It wasn't about firewood, lawn height, or mailbox colors. It was about power. It was about one person trying to control an entire community by fear, by intimidation, by erasing decency for the sake of control." He paused, looked at Evelyn. "You tried to silence everyone. And when that didn't work, you tried to burn the evidence. But the truth always survives, even through the ashes." When he stepped down, the room was silent. By the end of the day, the jury returned a guilty verdict on multiple charges: abuse of power, destruction of property, criminal mischief, and obstruction of justice. Evelyn Cross was sentenced to 5 years in state prison, with restitution payments owed to over a dozen families. But that wasn't the only consequence. The judge ordered an immediate suspension of the Ashbridge HOA charter. Effective immediately, the HOA was dissolved. Gone. Wiped clean. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, tears, and applause, not for vengeance, but for relief. A weight had been lifted from the community's chest. Months passed. Where the community center once stood, a new structure rose. Not a cold concrete box with locked doors and laminated rulebooks, but a community greenhouse and garden. It had been Logan's idea, funded by donations from neighbors and a grant from the county. The same families who once feared fines now worked together to plant herbs, vegetables, and flowers. Children painted colorful rocks and signs. Elderly neighbors shared stories, unafraid for the first time in years. And Logan, he declined any official role in the new neighborhood council. He didn't need the title, but every Saturday, you could find him at the garden with a shovel in hand, sleeves rolled up, talking with a neighbor, planting a seed. And every once in a while, when a fire crackled warmly in someone's backyard pit, a legal one this time, laughter echoed across the street. Justice had been served. But more importantly, community had been restored.